Well, welcome everybody to ETL on Patrol, the 10-minute patrol devotional. This quick devotional is designed to strengthen you in the Lord as you carry out the duties He's called you to. So whether you're patrolling the streets at home or abroad, we hope this encourages you. And if you've been blessed by the podcast and you'd like to connect with our community, we'd love to hear from you. We offer free retreats, discipleship, online studies, and other resources for those who've been called into a life of service. For more information, you can click on the links in the show notes below. Today's devotional comes from 1 Samuel chapter 1, and it's about a story of a woman named Hannah. Now, I want to give you a little context before we get into our text. Hannah was married to a man named Elkanah, and Hannah was unable to have children. And in that culture, barrenness carried deep emotional, social, and spiritual shame. And to make matters worse, Elkanah's other wife did have children, and she relentlessly taunted Hannah for her infertility. Chapter 1, verse 6 says, "Her rival used to provoke her grievously to irritate her because the Lord had closed her womb." And this suffering went on for years. You can imagine the pain, the deep longing for a child, years of unanswered prayers, and the cruel voice of comparison echoing in her own household. Her grief wasn't just about wanting a child, it was about identity, dignity, and belonging in a world that equated motherhood with worth. Scripture says that Hannah wept and would often refuse to eat because of her grieving. So let's pick up this story in 1 Samuel chapter 1, and we'll be in verses 9 through 18. After they had eaten and drunk in Shiloh, Hannah rose. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. She was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. And she vowed a vow and said, "O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant and remember me and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head." And she continued praying before the Lord, and Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was speaking in her heart, but only her lips moved, and her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli took her to be a drunken woman. And Eli said to her, "How long will you go on being drunk? Put your wine away from you." But Hannah answered, "No, my lord, I am a woman troubled in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for all along I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation." Then Eli answered, "Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition that you have made to him." And she said, "Let your servant find favor in your eyes." Then the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. And one of the first things I want us to notice is how Hannah arrives in this time of prayer. Verse 10 tells us that she was deeply distressed, and she prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. This wasn't a rehearsed, polite prayer. This was raw, desperate, real, broken. She's pouring her heart out. Many of us don't approach God like this. We approach God like we're walking into the chief's office, right? We straighten up our shirt, we choose our words carefully, and we try to be polite. It's like, "Good morning, sir. I know you're busy. I just want to make you aware of a few things." Now, I remember when I worked at the police academy, occasionally, someone would come running in the office and they'd say, "The chief's here," and everyone would be scrambling, be cleaning up our desks, tucking in our shirts, shaving, whatever it takes to make sure that we're presentable for the chief. But that's not what Hannah does. She doesn't make herself presentable before she goes before the Lord. She comes to God undone. She begins her prayer with the title, "O Lord of hosts," which means commander of heaven's armies or commander of multitudes. Interestingly, that's the same title Jesus used when he appeared to Joshua in our last devotional. "I am the commander of the Lord's army," Joshua 5:14. So the same divine warrior that told Joshua to bow is now the compassionate father that Hannah is pleading with. Even the priest Eli misunderstands Hannah's vulnerability. He thinks that she's drunk. And that should tell us something about how deeply expressive and unguarded she was in her prayer. Hannah responds to this accusation by saying, "No, I'm a woman who's troubled in spirit. I'm not drunk, but I've been pouring out my soul before the Lord." So this prayer wasn't performance. This prayer wasn't attention seeking. It was lament. It was a full-hearted outpouring of sorrow, longing, and trust and brokenness. And I think it's important for us to recognize that God welcomes lament, that God welcomes this type of prayer. Hannah's example shows us that we can come to Jesus with our burdens without fear. See, throughout Scripture, God does rebuke his people for disobedience, and he does rebuke them for complaining and rebellion, and he rebukes them for forgetting his faithfulness and wandering. But he never rebukes someone for coming honestly and pouring out their pain and confusion. He never rebukes somebody for just coming in their brokenness to him. You can read the Psalms written by David, a king, a man of war, a man who has witnessed far more trauma and chaos than we can imagine. David doesn't put on a brave face before his king. He bears it all. Psalm 110:1 says, "Why, O Lord, do you stand far away? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble?" Psalm 6:6, "I am weary with moaning. Every night I flood my bed with tears." The entire book of Lamentations is an inspired record of anguish and grief before God. And yes, it ends in hope, but the first 3 chapters is just brutal honesty of wrestling with the suffering that the people of Israel were experiencing. Matthew 11:28-29, that famous passage, Jesus says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest, for I am gentle and lowly in heart." There's only one time in the New Testament where Jesus describes his own character, and he chooses to describe himself as gentle and lowly. This is an invitation for the broken to come to him and to lay their brokenness before him. This is the kind of God that we serve. As for first responders and those who serve in the military, we see some of the most horrific and heartbreaking realities this world has to offer. Sometimes we're able to process it. Sometimes you can kind of just move on from it. But other times it sticks, and it produces confusion and anger, sleepless nights, deep sense of helplessness. And sometimes we can suffer from what clinicians may call a moral injury, which is when our deeply held morals and beliefs come into tension with something that we have seen or experienced. And that moral injury then produces those negative emotions such as anxiety and depression, feelings of helplessness. And I used to think that I had to box up those feelings and just kind of push it aside, move on, keep marching, stay strong. But what I eventually realized is that I am only so strong. And what I eventually learned is that strength is not found in ignoring the pain. It's found in bringing the pain to the feet of Jesus. And if you're like me, you may be thinking, well, I can't bring this to God because I'm wrestling with it. I'm struggling. I'm angry. I'm afraid. I'm confused. If I bring this to him, then it's going to be like I'm being unfaithful. I should be stronger. I should have more trust in him. I shouldn't be struggling with this. But I think the Psalms and the example of Hannah show us otherwise. Lament is not weakness. Lament is worship. It's the naming our pain and bringing it to the one who can actually hold it. It's an act of surrender and saying, Jesus, I don't understand this and I'm hurting, but I don't have to run from you. I can come into your arms. And when we avoid lament, we silently believe the lie that God can't handle our brokenness. And is that not prideful? But here's the truth. Jesus already bore your brokenness on the cross. He's not afraid of your grief, and he's not overwhelmed by your sorrow. He's gentle and lonely, and he actually draws near to the poor and to the broken in spirit. One author puts it this way: the spine of lament is hope. It's not the vacuous optimism that things will get better, but it's the deep, irrepressible conviction in the teeth of present evidence that God has not severed the umbilical cord. In other words, God meets us in the midst of our grief. We may not walk away with changed circumstances in that moment, but like Hannah, we can walk away with peace. Verse 18 says, when Hannah went her way, she ate and her face was no longer sad. Her womb was still empty, but her soul had been heard. And that was enough. And it's worth noting that God answers Hannah's prayer, and he gives her a son named Samuel. It shows that he wasn't turned away by her prayer. He didn't detest her brokenness. It actually drew him close. And I think it's also worth noting in conjunction with our last devotional that as Hannah praises to the Lord, she says, Lord, if you give me this son, then I will give him back to you, that he will be yours. And so he answers this prayer, and Hannah actually releases the most cherished gift she ever received back to God. And God uses that man, Samuel, mightily to help lead the nation of Israel, to help anoint men like David. So in closing, friend, God is not asking you to get it together before you come to him. He's inviting you to come as you are, troubled, overwhelmed, confused, angry, grieving, and like a loving father, he will meet you there. The commander of heaven's armies is also the God who suffers with you. The one who commands the storm also weeps with those who mourn. And so today, whatever you're carrying, pour it out before him. He is strong enough to hold it, and he's kind enough to heal it. Well, thank you for listening to today's devotional. If you enjoyed this podcast, it would mean so much to us if you would leave a 5-star review wherever you're listening. It just helps us get the word out to those who also may need to hear this message. If you have any thoughts, suggestions, or questions, please reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. Other than that, God bless. Be safe.